Recording. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Oregon State Board of Nursing Lunch and Learn event regarding the Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 851, Division 21 of the Nurse Practice Act. This division pertains to the standards for approval of nursing education programs. So my name is Laura Blackhurst. I am a policy analyst for the Board of Nursing, focusing in nursing education. On the call, we have several other board staff, including Nicole Van Winkle, our policy coordinator, who will be assisting me in monitoring the chat and sharing some links, as well as our executive director, Rachel Prusak. This session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the OSBN YouTube channel, Oregon State Board of Nursing, all one word, and we will share that link in the chat for viewing at any time. Otherwise, if I can ask that for this lunch and learn, please mute your mic and hold off on questions. We will have a dedicated time for the question and answers at the end. And then additionally, Nicole will be putting in the chat a link to the Division 21 rules for anyone who wishes to view the rules during this presentation. So today's content will provide an overview of the Division 21 administrative rules, which became effective on July 1st. Our plan today is to provide a brief overview of all administrative rules in this division, and at the end of this overview, take a moment to highlight previous rules that have been repealed. Following the presentation of the administrative rules, we will discuss the relocation of Division 51 administrative rules. Previously, Division 51 established standards for advanced practice registered nursing education programs. However, effective July 1st, those OARs were repealed. Now, those standards were not lost, but instead have been incorporated into Division 21. And so we'll highlight where those standards can now be found. And then finally, at the conclusion of all of that content, we'll have time for the Q&A. And again, please feel free to place questions in the chat as you go. However, if you're asking about a specific rule, please note which rule you are referring to. Otherwise, I'll begin with a brief description of Division 21. So broadly speaking, this set of rules is where the 9-member governor-appointed Board of Nursing operationalizes the Nurse Practice Act's statutory requirements related to the approval and standards of nursing education programs. The purpose of the rules in Division 21 are to provide an approval process for new programs which meet board standards, to establish accreditation requirements for nursing programs, to outline how programs can maintain their board approval, including the program survey process, to establish board standards related to curriculum, faculty, and resources, and finally, to set expectations for ongoing education program reporting and approval of changes. Now, to provide a little bit of background on this work of updating Division 21's administrative rules, this division has actually been undergoing revisions since 2023. However, work really renewed in earnest starting spring of 24. From the outset, we've had 4 primary goals that informed the work of updating our administrative rules. First, we've aimed to align Oregon with national and regional regulatory trends using data and evidence to inform our administrative rules. Second, we've aimed to remove unnecessary barriers for nursing education programs while still ensuring that public protection is upheld. We have aimed to simplify regulatory standards by developing one set of OARs for academic institutions. And this really speaks to the work of incorporating APRN program rules into Division 21 so that institutions have one set of administrative rules to follow. And then finally, we've had the goal of increasing the accessibility of the Nurse Practice Act, truly aiming for more clear, understandable language and improving readability. And then to give you a glimpse of the timeline of this work, between April and July of 2024, board staff were highly involved in the research and development, leading to a first draft of Division 21. From July to October of 2024, board staff sought public input from a Rule Advisory Committee. And I want to note that the Rule Advisory Committee for Division 21 featured individuals from public and private education institutions, urban and rural, as well as healthcare partners, and specifically partners who worked with nursing schools to place students in clinical settings. From October of 24 to this January, board staff reviewed thoroughly all of the feedback we received from our advisory committee, relooked at the evidence and national and regional trends, and from that developed a second draft of Division 21. This draft was completed in late January, and we immediately took it back to our advisory committee for further input. And so between February and March of 2025, board staff reviewed the second round of feedback and developed a third draft. And then finally, between April of 25 and July of 25, board staff presented a third and final draft to the board. We held a public rule hearing in May, and the board gave their final approval of these rules in June, leading to that July 1st effective date. Now, although we'll be reviewing all of the administrative rules, in giving you an at-a-glance big picture summary of changes to Division 21, these would be that we have simplified the new program approval process. We've added a requirement of national nursing accreditation. We've removed barriers around reporting and approvals for education programs. We've updated faculty and administrator qualifications. We now have greater flexibility around clinical experiences, and we've updated NCLEX standards for our programs. Okay, so with that thorough overview, I'm going to move into the actual review of Division 21 rules. So we'll begin with Rule 0010, which is the establishment and approval of a new nursing education program. As you might imagine, this rule provides the standards for any institution that wishes to establish a new nursing program physically present and located in Oregon. The previous approval process was a 5-step process beginning well over a year in advance. And based on recommendations from the National Council of State Board of Nursing, we've simplified this down into 3 steps. So we've removed some redundant requirements between different steps and removed some of the limitations on timelines. For an institution wishing to establish a new nursing program, the 3-step approval process now involves step 1, a preliminary development application, wherein an institution showcases the need for a new nursing program and the resources to support that program's development. Step 2 is an initial application, an initial approval for admission of students, where the program showcases their developed curriculum, their faculty, physical resources, and clinical resources prior to accepting students. And then step 3 is full approval. This step occurs after a new program has graduated their first cohort of students and gives the board an opportunity to evaluate the quality and safety of the program once operating. From here, we will move into Rule 0012, accreditation requirements of nursing education programs. So this new administrative rule requires all nursing education programs to obtain national nursing accreditation. The board strongly believes that requiring accreditation supports our mission of public protection, as quality education produces safe and competent nurses. The rules do not specify or mandate a specific accreditor. We recognize that it's important that programs partner with an accreditor that meets their needs, but the rules do require that the accrediting agency is recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. For our current approved nursing programs, the expectation is that they will obtain national nursing accreditation within 4 years of the effective date of our new rules. That is July 1st, 2029. And then for any new future program, the expectation is that they would also have 4 years following their full approval. This new rule also establishes the documentation and reporting standards surrounding accreditation, setting a standard that nursing programs will keep the board informed of communications with an accreditor. Our next rule is 0015, continuing board approval of nursing education programs. This rule has actually just undergone some reorganization. First and foremost, to start with our routine procedures related to continuing approval first. We've also aimed to simplify the survey process in light of the new requirements around accreditation. And so those accredited programs can provide to the board copies of their accreditation self-study reports without needing to develop a separate self-study for OSBN. We hope that this change will significantly decrease the amount of work for an education program that is being surveyed by OSBN. We've also aimed to provide clarity around why the board can authorize a survey, including the time frame and expectations around the survey. And finally, we've incorporated or moved into this rule information on the deficiency program process for any program that may not be meeting a standard for approval. Our next rule is 0025, reports and approvals. And like with the previous rule, this rule has seen some reorganization to start with routine procedures first. We've also attempted to clarify and simplify what information needs reported to the board, outlining what requires a notification versus what truly requires board approval. Now, within this section of our rules, we have removed a few barriers and aligned with our statutory authority. Nursing programs must notify the board of a change in their nurse administrator, but that individual no longer needs to be approved by the board. Institutions can now appoint their administrators, often a dean or director, within the nurse administrator qualifications established later in rule. Programs will also no longer need to seek board approval to change admissions or enrollment numbers. And if a program that's approved wishes to open or add an extended campus, that now requires notification but not approval. New to this rule is an approval process surrounding an approved nursing program, offering a new education track or an innovative education approach, which again, we hope will allow programs more flexibility with their educational offerings. And then finally, new to this rule, but not new overall, is some content that has been relocated around the approval of faculty and administrators by exception. The next rule we're going to look at is 0035, closing of an approved nursing education program. Now, in this rule, we have clarified and simplified expectations around closing an approved nursing program. Our updates here also provided us an opportunity to align with standards that are already prescribed by the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission, which does establish standards for the closing of an overall education institution. Rule 0040, Nursing Education Program Organization and Administration. We have updated some of the responsibilities of the nursing administrator in leading the nursing education program. As previously mentioned, we have removed the requirement that the nurse administrator be board approved, although again, they must still meet the qualifications for the role established in our next rule. And then finally, we've added new information and updated some previous information regarding records and record retention. Again, relocated from a different rule. Rule 0045, nursing faculty has seen some exciting changes as, again, barriers have been removed to allow nursing programs greater flexibility in their operations. We have revised our faculty qualifications to align with regional and national trends. We have specifically removed very prescriptive language around the number of years of full-time direct care patient experience. We continue to maintain education standards for our nurse educators and our nurse educator associates, but we allow programs now to appoint faculty who are academically and experientially qualified for their teaching assignments. New to this rule are standards for APRN program faculty. That is an example of content relocated from Division 51. We've also clarified expectations around faculty professional development and how programs support faculty in ensuring that ongoing development occurs. And finally, we've updated some of our guidance on clinical ratios and simulation. We've removed some unclear language around a community-based placement and meaningful presence of faculty, terms which led to a significant amount of questions. And instead, we've replaced it with new language that really focuses on the nature of student supervision. Is this a clinical experience where that faculty member needs to be on site directly supervising the student? Is this the type of placement that we do often see in community settings, but where students are working closely with an employee of that clinical setting who might be supervising the student? And so prescribing new clinical ratios for that. Our next rule is 0050. This is curriculum. So in the curricular standards, we've made minor changes to the overall curricular standards of our programs. However, part of those updates have been ensuring that we use the same language consistently in other parts of the Nurse Practice Act. And so now we've aimed to ensure that nursing students are prepared for the roles described in Divisions 45 and 55, those being our scope and standards of practice for LPNs, RNs, and APRNs, respectively. We've additionally clarified some of the education requirements around pain and cultural competence, which are statutorily mandated topics, and again, newly incorporated curricular standards for our APRN programs. The language around clinical and simulation has also received some updates. So first and foremost is a terminology change. Nursing practice experience is now updated to clinical component. In our analysis and desire to make the Practice Act more accessible, this terminology reflects the broader public's understanding of that clinical piece of a nurse's education and also aligns with the language we see being used in our statutes. We've affirmed more directly in rule that clinical may occur in any setting impacting a health outcome and hope that that broadens the possibilities for our nursing programs to explore. We've also removed a barrier that a one-on-one final practicum experience is required, although that option is retained for nursing programs to still have a one-on-one practicum if they wish. And finally here, in terms of simulation, we have removed some redundant language in the simulation rules and very minorly revised the limit on replacement of clinical with simulation to 50%, reflecting the state of evidence on simulation. Rule 0051 is exception requests for clinical experiences due to unforeseen circumstances. And this was a temporary rule that became effective in January of this year. But the intent of this rule was to provide nursing programs with flexibility in clinical standards when these unforeseen circumstances occur, which might otherwise affect a student's progression or even delay graduation. So the examples used in rule are things like work stoppages, natural disasters, pandemics, and in fact, much of this rule was based on the board's past protocol for supporting nurses during the COVID-19 pandemic. Importantly, this rule does not apply to any routine or foreseeable challenges in locating clinical placements, but in summary, a nursing program can submit and have approved by board staff alternate plans for student learning. Nursing programs will tell us how students achieve the specific course and program outcomes when traditional clinical doesn't occur. And this rule does allow some flexibility for programs to exceed the limits on simulation in the curriculum. Now, our next rule is 0055, program responsibilities to students. And within this rule, we've attempted to more clearly state what information must be provided to student applicants. Examples here include travel expectations, articulation agreements, program policies. And then additionally, we've attempted to clarify standards for students while in the program, more clearly referencing Oregon Health Authority requirements for students in clinical experiences and the necessary support services of the program. Nursing programs are now required to have a documented process for the remediation of clinical incidents. This both benefits the student in having an established remediation process, but also helps to, again, ensure public protection as clinical incidents are being addressed. And finally, we've removed language that placed onus on nursing programs to share board limits on eligibility. Rule 0065 is facilities and resources. This rule has actually had really minor revisions, again, primarily cleaning up, updating, clarifying language. We've also removed and relocated information regarding clinical nurses and preceptors. We determined that it was difficult to find in this rule, and so we have relocated some of the content around preceptors to where clinical and faculty for clinical are discussed earlier in the rules. Rule 0070 is outcomes and evaluation. And once again, we've aimed to simplify some of the requirements around a program's systematic plan of evaluation. And we've newly relocated our NCLEX standards from Rule 0018, which was repealed. We determined that NCLEX pass rates are a component of a nursing program's overall outcomes and evaluation and made more sense to cluster here. Finally, the new pass rate standards primarily speak to non-accredited programs. And this is because an accredited program will have a rigorous standard that they must meet for their accreditor. And in wanting to simplify the process for our programs, where they were not in a position of needing to meet our requirements and an accreditor's requirements, and that potential that they may differ, we now allow accredited programs to simply comply with their accreditor standards. So for our non-accredited programs, we also offer more paths to meet the pass rate standard. We continue to look at first-time program pass rates and the total pass rate of program graduates, but we will now look over either a 12-month or 36-month period. And finally, one additional change is that we've actually raised the requirement around the first-time pass rate up to 80%, again, more in line with national standards. Finally, Rule 0090, standards for out-of-state pre-licensure programs offering educational experiences in Oregon. We really realigned this rule with the scope of our authority. Our new process is that out-of-state pre-licensure nursing programs must notify of clinical placements in Oregon, but this no longer requires approval. Other regulatory processes for higher education still apply. And so, depending on the out of state school's plans for enrollment or size, that does mean still working with Oregon's Higher Education Coordinating Commission or obtaining authorization via a state reciprocity agreement. And lastly, we removed a significant amount of redundant information regarding out of state programs that physically set up in Oregon, as any program that sets up a physical presence in Oregon would actually be held to all of the previous standards we've discussed, including the very first slide on our new program approval process. Finally, I want to highlight some of the rules that have been repealed from Division 21. And again, one thing I truly want to highlight is that a lot of this content or standards are not gone. There's been a significant amount of reorganization. So as we discussed, we've repealed our rule on NCLEX standards. However, that content was simply relocated to outcomes and evaluation. We've repealed a rule on the denial or withdrawal of approval of a program. Again, that content was consolidated into our overall rule on continuing board approval. We repealed a rule on consultative services as board staff do not offer consultation. We've repealed a rule on records. This content was consolidated into the rule on nurse education program, organization, and administration. And finally, we repealed a rule for providing standards for reentry programs, really in alignment with the scope of our authority in the Oregon Revised Statutes. So with that, I'm going to shift topics to thinking about the relocation of Division 51 OARs. As I shared at the beginning, APRN education program standards have been consolidated into Division 21 so that any institution which offers APRN education and RN level education does not have to look to two different sets of standards. This repeal of Division 51 is effective as of July 1st. On this slide, I'm going to provide a table kind of clarifying where content shuffled around. So in our left-hand column, you can see the 4 previous Division 51 rules. Interestingly, Division 51 tended to have less rules, but longer in length. But again, that content has been consolidated into Division 21. And so you can see in our right-hand column where that content now lives in Division 21. So it has been divided up a little bit. So for example, previous approval requirements now fall into Division 21 rules regarding curriculum, administration, faculty, clinical preceptor information in different spaces. The approval of an APRN program will now follow the new approval process in Division 21. Accreditation requirements, which existed in Division 51, now follow the same process in Division 21. And finally, even the ongoing approval periods, reports, special conditions, that information has been consolidated into our rule on reports and appeals in Division 21. So this was a tremendous amount of information. And from here, we now have time for the questions and answers. Let me take a look at the chat. So I see your first question is, can I elaborate on the removal of a one-on-one final practicum? What are other programs doing in substitute? So one of the things we looked at was that, again, looking at national and regional regulatory trends, we were finding that most states were not mandating or requiring a one-on-one experience for every student. And so part of the removal is just aligning with our other states. I do believe, this is anecdotal, that many of our nursing programs are still going to keep a final practicum experience. We still have rules sort of outlining what that would look like and what the faculty supervision would look like. So I think that is the information I'm able to share, but really it was truly, again, aligning Oregon with how we see other states regulating education. Thank you for the question. And if anyone does feel like putting a hand up and just unmuting rather than typing in the chat, you are more than welcome to do so. All right, I'm going to give a little bit more time. All right, any other questions regarding changes to Division 21 or even some of that content relocated from Division 51. I see the question about the slides in the presentation available. I believe the recording of this presentation is available on YouTube. All right. Well, then I hope that this information was helpful. I hope that this means it was clear throughout the presentation. Um, Lois, thank you so much for your feedback. And I know that many members of our RAC are on this call as well. And so thank you for your input throughout this process. All right. Well, then, thank you for your time today. I will put up on this final slide some contact information. Here's how you can contact me, our executive director, and then just general board questions as well. All right. Thank you all so much for your time today.